Well, hello everybody and welcome to Conversations with the Dean. We're honored today to have Bill Owens with us. Bill is the former Chief Financial Officer of Healthsouth. Welcome, Bill.
Well, Attorney, it's my pleasure to be here today.
Well, we're honored to have you on the Lipscomb campus, and you're actually the second Chief Financial Officer of Healthsouth that we've had. Weston Smith was here last year, and if I'm not mistaken, Weston followed you as a CFO
Yes,
of
he did.
Healthsouth.
Not only did I serve as CFO of Healthsouth, but I also served as COO and CEO of Healthsouth.
Okay.
And Weston followed me as CFO when I became the COO of the company.
Now, it's been a few years, Bill, since Healthsouth was in every newspaper in the world and ran into a lot of challenging times. So maybe for our viewers who aren't as familiar with what happened with Healthsouth, perhaps you could, first of all, just briefly describe what the business of Healthsouth was, and then talk just for a moment about what happened that caused the business to really stumble.
Okay, Attorney, I'll be glad to. Healthsouth was one of the three largest healthcare companies in the world. We specialized in non-traditional services. So we weren't a hospital company like HCA here in Nashville is. Our four primary product lines were inpatient rehabilitation, which we had a rehab hospital here in Nashville on the campus of Vanderbilt, outpatient rehabilitation, outpatient surgery, and outpatient diagnostics. We had over 2,000 patient care locations in all 50 states. We were also in Puerto Rico, the United Kingdom, and Australia. So we were an international company.
Based in Birmingham,
Alabama. And the company was founded in 1984, grew from basically an idea to that company that had over 2,000 locations with over 50,000 employees and $4 billion in revenue. We were listed, we went public in 1986, went on the NASDAQ exchange, then we went on the big board in 1989. And stock performed well, but unfortunately what everybody didn't know was that there had been a long-running accounting fraud going on at Healthsouth, which basically had started the quarter after we went public. And it started way back in 1986. And I was involved in that accounting fraud and have admitted my involvement, was voluntarily turned myself into the Justice Department, and was involved in what you were discussing earlier when we were in the press so much in 2003 and 2004. I was sentenced to do 60 months in federal prison as a result of my involvement in the Healthsouth fraud, and I served 43 months at the prison camp at Maxwell Air Force Base. I actually served 37 months there and did 6 months in combination of halfway house and home confinement. And actually I'm still on probation today. My probation does not end for about 4 more months.
So Bill, what went wrong?
It's the classic story of greed and ego, pride, all the great sins that we're warned about all came together. And at its core is the difference between what the investment community expected from us and what we produced, where there was a gap. And way back when it started, it was a small gap. And I was asked back in early 1987 to fix the numbers, to change our financial statements to make it reflect a higher number that would agree with Wall Street expectations. And it was a small number, tens of thousands of dollars. And unfortunately, I didn't apply all those things my mama taught me and all those things I learned in Sunday school and church as a child to know, and I knew the difference between right and wrong, but I just made a bad decision. I made the wrong decision way back then, and then over time it just snowballed and snowballed out of control. And I think that's one of the messages that I really like to get across is, when you make those little decisions to do the wrong thing, they're very easy for them to build, and ultimately you end up so far in you can't get out. And that's what happened to me. But those still were my decisions. I mean, I don't blame anybody else for that. I'm the one that made that bad decision. I was a 28-year-old CPA. I knew better. It doesn't matter how young I was, doesn't matter who influenced me, who asked me, who put pressure on me. None of those things matter, because I was a grown man and I made a bad decision. And then over the next 16 years, continue to make a series of bad decisions.
Bill, let me take you back to the early days of what you called plugging the numbers. Our accounting students will know that there are reserve accounts that you can take money out of in order to move into revenues or expenses. In those early days, were you technically committing fraud, or were you just simply manipulating the numbers in a way that many people might consider to be completely legitimate?
You could make an argument that it was aggressive accounting. I contend that it was not. I speak a lot on this topic, and I've broken down our fraud into 5 phases. The initial phase was very short. It was only about a 3/4 phase, which was really just aggressively accounting for accounts receivable. The second phase was being very conservative in our booking of our acquisitions. So we would create reserves for accounts receivable, reserves for inventory. We would pad accounts payable. So we'd understate our current assets, overstate our current liabilities, and that would inflate goodwill. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually conservative accounting, and one of the basic principles of accounting is conservatism.
Sure.
But what was then done wrong was those reserves, which nobody was told about. We didn't book it into a reserve account. We didn't tell our auditors. We didn't tell anyone that we had booked these reserves. Then we would take those where we had understated receivables, and we would start writing those receivables up. That's where I contend the fraud occurred. And I think anybody that knows anything about accounting will agree with me, because there are rules of how if you change an opening entry, how it should be done. If you do it in the first 12 months after the booking of the acquisition, then you adjust goodwill. You basically re-record the acquisition. After 12 months, if you determine that you were wrong in booking your opening entry, then it's recorded as a one-time adjustment. And so it shows as a single line in the statement of retained earnings. So we did not do it correctly, and we were inflating our earnings by taking those reserves and running them into income.
Now, some people might call that progression that you just described a slippery slope. I think we've all heard that term. So as you look back, Bill, on your experience, would you say that would accurately describe what you found yourself caught up in?
Absolutely. I prefer to use the term snowball, but it got worse and worse and worse.
And you couldn't get yourself out of it.
Well, the initial problem was we committed to too high of a growth rate in the IPO process. We committed to a 25% growth rate. We were influenced by and pressured by the investment community, by the investment bankers to do that, and our leadership succumbed to that, to committing to a 25% growth rate. And we knew we couldn't do it, and I knew when I was sitting in that meeting when that decision was made that we couldn't do that. But how do you, when you're a 28-year-old, or it doesn't matter how old you are, if you're not the guy calling the shots, how do you in a meeting raise your hand and say, well, that's not right? We should, we all should have that freedom, but in most corporate structures you don't. You're not going to, especially when it's the CEO who's running the show. Is the controller of the company going to, in front of a room full of investment bankers and attorneys, going to say, well, now wait a minute, that's not right. We can't do that. So our fate was set way back in 1986 when we went public, because the analyst expectations were set way too high from the start. And then the reason it's a slippery slope or a snowball is if you have a growth rate, and ours was 25%. And we don't achieve it, and we inflate the numbers to equal that. Well, now your growth rate is 26, 27, 28% over what you really did. And my initial hope was always, well, this is just a short-term thing and it will catch up. Well, if we couldn't do 25%, then how can we do 28%? And it doesn't take long for that slope to become so slippery that you're sliding down the hill out of control. And that's what happened to us, and I believe it happens to most people that get involved in an accounting fraud or a fraudulent situation. I don't think most of these people are bad people. They're not career criminals. Most of them are just regular, everyday guys or girls. I was a deacon in a Baptist church when I was involved in this. I taught Sunday school on Sunday mornings, but somehow I was able to compartmentalize my life so that on Monday morning when I went to work, I didn't take my faith into the workplace with me. And I think that's really one of the key lessons that is to be learned here, is that we as Christians, and I know this is a Christian university, and I'm happy that there are universities like Lipscomb out there who hopefully are producing good, solid citizens, and that they'll make better decisions than the ones I made. And if my message can get across to some of your students or anybody else in the community, that if you make the little decisions, make them the right way, make them always come down on the right side versus the wrong side, then you won't ever be on that slippery slope.
We often tell our students, Bill, especially our accounting students, that this is the real world that they will live in, and that they may well find themselves as young accountants, particularly if they go to work for public companies, under great pressure to be complicit in these types of situations. Quite often it starts relatively innocently, but at some point they may have to make a decision between their job and doing what they at least have been taught was the right thing to do. Would you say we're giving our students good advice?
I would say you are giving them the best advice that you'll ever give them. I wouldn't just say that it's likely. I would say that it's probable. And how big a decision will that be? It's hard to say. But there will be something that will challenge their moral code at some point, and they'll have to make a decision as to which way do I go. Do I compromise my beliefs? Do I compromise what I know is right and wrong for my career? I believe that if more of us would say no, then the times or the situations in which that arise would diminish. But unfortunately, the society in which we live in, too many people will say, this is just so small, this is not that big a deal, or as we would talk about in the accounting world, it's just not material. And they will go ahead and do it. But I contend that if we just make even the small decision, and some of those will be self-driven, whether or not you fudge on your expense report. Those are all, it's not always a question that somebody else brings to you. Many times those things are driven by decisions that you've made on your own. But if you always come down on the right side of the question, then you don't have to worry about one day waking up and you're into the swamp up to your neck and you don't know where you're going to go.
We hear a lot about tone at the top. We talk a lot through our Dean Institute for Corporate Governance and Integrity about tone at the top. Looking back on your experience, would you have interviewed your CEO more carefully about his own moral commitment?
I don't know if that would have made a difference at that point. He was a church-going guy too. And I learned over time more about him. But those are questions, those are things that people should seek out to know about their leaders. And I don't think that anybody at Healthsouth, whether it be the founders of the company or the top management as the company grew, set out to do what ended up happening. That was not the plan when we set out, but it was the cards that we were dealt, and we made bad decisions along the way. And so when I joined the company, I don't know if I would have been able to learn that. I should have left long before I did. I will always contend that my primary sin was pride. Most people will be surprised that I will say that I don't think I was ever truly motivated by greed. I was motivated by pride. There were times when I felt like I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof, that nobody could catch me. But then there were other times when I was just too prideful to admit what I had done wrong, and I was trying to fix it But fixing something that you did wrong is just covering it up, right? I mean, we can say that we're fixing it, but in the long run, that's really just covering it up. So when we talk about the big sins, and when you read the Bible, you constantly run across passages where it talks about the Lord does not like prideful people, and I was a very prideful person, and this situation has humbled me significantly.
We have a lot of pride in this country, and we have a lot of greed in this country. We've heard a lot, particularly in recent months, through the Occupy Wall Street movement, following the debacle in the real estate industry, about the role of Wall Street and the greed of Wall Street. I've heard you say in this conversation today that you felt like the investment bankers pushed you to commit to things that perhaps you shouldn't have committed to.
Yes.
Were they the bad guys?
They were part of the process. We were all the bad guys. It's hard to pinpoint where the problem is. I mean, if you're talking to somebody that invests money in a company, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people because I've talked about the stress and the pressure that being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company puts on your life. I know from that your background is not in academics. You came from the investment banking world.
I did.
You'd put in those 70 and 80-hour weeks. When I was the CFO, COO, and CEO of Healthsouth, I don't ever remember having a meal that didn't get interrupted by a phone call. And even though I made a lot of money and I had vacation homes and all those things, still I was always working, always busy. And I've talked to people and they say, well, why didn't you just not do that? I said, well, do you invest money do you have any money invested in the stock market? And if they'll say yes, I'll say, well, are you at all concerned about the quality of life of the CEO of that company? Or are you more concerned that he is working hard to make sure that your investment, you get a return on your investment? And that is, and the truth is, the latter is the
Absolutely.
truth. That's what we're concerned about. And so when you talk about the greed of Wall Street, we're really talking about the greed of our country. Because Wall Street is just where that's just the people that handle the transactions. It's the big insurance companies, it's the big funds of retirement funds, and even grandma and granddaddy who have stock in some company. They all want a return. They want something, and so that groundswell of everybody wanting a return ultimately results in the pressure, the further you go up the line, getting greater and greater and greater, and then people succumbing to things like greed. Surely, I understand the Occupy Wall Street concern, because investment bankers make a lot of money. I'm not going to suggest that you did when you were an investment banker, but I knew investment bankers that were making $15, $20, $30 million a year. And sometimes I'd have a conversation with them of, what value do you bring? To not just but to society. What are you adding to society? And most of the time we'd come down to the side of, well, they weren't real sure. But not that I agree with Occupy Wall Street at all, because I don't. I believe in capitalism, and I believe that capitalism is the right way, that's the right economic model. It just has to be capitalism under control, not capitalism run amok.
Well, I think we've all watched this process play out, and I think we've all become very concerned about where our country is headed. It's not a simple, even a black and white dilemma, but we've got a major problem in this country, and it largely revolves around where do we go from here relative to the haves and the have-nots.
Right.
Much of that is driven by Wall Street and the returns, public companies. If you could draw on your advice, or your experience rather, and give advice to the president to say, here's what I think we need to do to fix this country, what would your advice be?
Well, I truly believe that our problem in this country is not economic, and it's not social. Well, it is social. It is lack of faithful, committed people in this country. The statistics that I have seen, and I don't know that these are exactly accurate, that today only 1 in 5 people in this country, so 20% of our population, are regular churchgoers. And it's not just Christian. I mean, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, I mean, whatever the faith is, only 1 in 5 are regular churchgoers. So, and now a regular churchgoer is defined as somebody that attends church at least once a month. Mm-hmm. That's not somebody that's there on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night for supper. That's once a month. And so I believe that our nation's problems are much more fundamental than economics. I mean, if we would return to a nation of faithful believers and a good moral code, then we could come back to a nation that is economically stable and makes good fiscal decisions. Because then if we had that, now how do we get there? I don't know. I wish I had answers to that question. And that's not going to be a popular stance for anybody to take that's trying to get elected president of the United States. The other thing, if I was limited and was not allowed to talk about spiritual issues, I would say that the country's got to tighten its belt. We all have to get ready for some tough times. And that's not just the wealthy, that's not just the poor, that's all of us. We can't spend more than we make. And we've been doing it way too long. And we've mortgaged our future, and now it's time to start making our mortgage payments. And that's sad, but it's the truth.
Bill, we're almost out of time, but I'd like to go back to where we started the conversation before we end our conversation. I was particularly impressed as I read through some of your comments and some of the things about your background, about the night you spent in prayer before all of this came to light.
Right.
You went through a very agonizing period that evening where you decided what to do.
I did.
Take us through
that. And I have to
that.
take you back just a little bit to get to that night. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I grew up poor, and I had to make my own way. And I learned early in life that if whatever I was going to do, whatever I was going to have, was up to me, not up to anybody else. And I became very self-reliant, and this affected my relationships throughout most of my life, the fact that I was so self-reliant. I didn't know how to ask for help. It even affected my spiritual relationship, because even though I've been a believer in Jesus Christ since I was a young boy and was baptized when I was in the 3rd grade, I never really turned my life over to Jesus and never really asked Him for His help. I didn't think I needed it because I was able to do it on my own. And I was pretty successful in doing it on my own. I went to college and paid my own way to college and graduated with summa cum laude and only made 1 B the whole time I was there, and became a CPA and a successful businessman. And I did that. That was, at least in those days, that was my opinion. That was me. I had not asked for help and had truly never gotten on my hands and knees and prayed and asked God for His help for me. Now I'd pray. I was a prayerful person. I'd pray for my family, and I'd pray for my church, and I'd pray for other people. But I never ever asked for God's help. So when everything fell apart at Healthsouth and things were getting worse and worse, I got a subpoena. And ultimately, I opened that subpoena and read it. And this may sound a little disingenuous to you, but when I read it, it all of a sudden hit me like a ton of bricks that for me to continue doing what I had been doing, I was going to have to commit perjury. And it really wasn't the crime of perjury that was my problem. I'd committed enough crimes in the white-collar world that one more was not that big a deal. And it wasn't the fact that I was going to lie. That really wasn't the problem, because I had done that enough that really had become just routine. The problem was I was going to have to put my hand on a Bible, or at least raise my hand, and swear an oath to God that I was going to tell the truth, and then I was going to lie. And all of a sudden, I realized that I had hit the wall of what I could not do. And so I went home that night, and I was alone at home, and I had my subpoena with me, and I spent a long night agonizing over what was I going to do. Because remember, I told you I was self-reliant. What was Bill Owens going to do to fix this problem? I knew what I couldn't do, but what else could I do? How could I fix this without doing that? At one point during the night, I got my pistol out and loaded it and put it to my head and explored that as an option, because I was exploring all the options. And I either, depending on your point of view, I either didn't have enough guts or I had too much guts to pull the trigger. So I ultimately put the pistol down, and finally, about 2 in the morning, I got down on my hands and knees and did what I had never done. I prayed for myself, and I asked God to please tell me what to do. And I'm a real conservative person, very conservative in my faith, and but I will tell you that as surely as you can hear me speaking right now, on my knees in my bedroom near Birmingham, Alabama, as I was asking God what to do, I heard the words, "Do the right thing." I heard them, just like there was somebody standing in the room with me. I even stopped and looked around and said, "Who's here? I'm here by myself." And then I did the classic, well, I must have fallen asleep. I must have dreamed that. I didn't really hear that. So I started praying again, and I said, "God, I think I heard something, but I wasn't sure if that was you or not. So if that was really you, I need you to tell me again." Well, it happened again. And I heard those same words, "Do the right thing." Now, I've always thought it was just a little ironic that he didn't tell me exactly what to do. He told me to do the right thing. It was still up to me to decide what the right thing was. But I stood up from that prayer, and I had had a stressful life for a very long time. Generally, I always needed something to help me go to sleep. And I stood up from that prayer, and I laid down, and I slept like a baby. Because all of a sudden, I had direction. I had direction that God had given me. And I set out the next day doing the right thing. Now, I haven't liked all the answers that I got that I've gotten in this process. I did go to prison, and I didn't like that, but that was part of it. That was part of doing the right thing. I lost my first marriage. My first wife and I have been married for 28 years, and that marriage fell apart, and that was not a great result. And I have some issues with my children that are still unresolved, but we're working on it. And but just God doesn't tell you that you're always going to have everything rosy, and I don't blame God for what happened to me. Once again, it was the things that created that situation were decisions that I made. Maybe if I'd gotten down on my hands and knees when I was 28 years old, when I was confronted with doing the wrong thing back then, and I'd asked God, maybe He'd have told me then to do the right thing. And then I wouldn't be in that situation. But that's the night I turned it over. And that's the night that I went from being a believer in Jesus to being a follower. And I try every day now to be a follower. And so hopefully, of course I fall short. We all fall short. That's the reason Jesus had to hang on the cross for us, is because we all fall short. But that's really the crux of my story, is that if you will just turn it over. There's a great song that I love. It's by a band called Need to Breathe, and they have a song called Lay 'Em Down. And I love that song because it talks about taking all your burdens and laying them at the feet of Jesus. And I try to do that now. And I'm a much more humble person than I was, and I'm a much happier person than I was.
Bill, we've said here at Lipscomb that since 1891, our mission has been to not only instill academic excellence, but also to challenge our students to develop a high code of moral character and integrity. And I think you've stated that very articulately in this conversation. We have 34,000 alums living around the world today, but we're yet to graduate the first perfect person. And yet we all try to achieve the very thing that you're trying to achieve. So thank you for your testimony.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that my story can be used to help others make better decisions. There are a lot of people that have stories like mine. Mine just happened to end up on the front page of the paper. And so if I can use that to help others, then that is what I'd like to do.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for coming to Lipscomb.
Well, thank you.
Our guest today has been Bill Owens, who's the former Chief Financial Officer of Healthsouth. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon for Conversations with the Dean.